Welcome back to a very special edition of the Lighthouse Keepers Podcast. I'm your host, Mary Ellen Sherlock, and I'm super jazzed to be here at the Horton Point Lighthouse in Southold, Long Island, with Mary Korpi, a very good friend and the author of the Lady Lighthouse Keeper. Mary, thank you so much for inviting us here. I know you're a volunteer here at the Horton Point Lighthouse. You're the author of the Lady Lighthouse Keeper. We're going to talk about this, but you're also, just like me, a person who is fascinated with lighthouses, which is how this all came to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. There's something I think growing up on Long Island and loving the beach, and there's something about the romance, the presumed romance of lighthouses. As I learned more about them, it's actually a lot of very hard work. There's not
Yes.
really a lot of romance at a lighthouse, but it would appear that way from the outside, though.
Yes.
So I was very attracted to them
Yeah.
throughout my life. Loved Fire Island particularly. That was the closest big one by me then.
I think the thing that's so incredible to our viewers and listeners is you wrote a book about the Horton Point Lighthouse, and we're going to talk a little bit about Stella, the Lady Lighthouse Keeper. And I also did, unbeknowing that we both
Yes,
had this fascination
that's right.
with this magical place. And I think there's so much that Long Islanders can take from this. People that also have a love for the magic of a lighthouse. It's the reason why that I named the podcast the Lighthouse Keepers podcast, because there's so many metaphors and symbolisms that come with that, and that's kind of what I'm hoping you'll share with our listeners today and our viewers today, especially when we're going to talk about this book. Can you tell us how the Lady Lighthouse Keeper came to be? This is a true story, guys, and it's really fascinating.
Okay. Sure, my pleasure. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much for including me. So, I retired out to the North Fork in June of 2017. I had been a special ed vocational counselor, and I was looking to get involved and be a part of the community, meet new people out here. And I saw an ad for a lighthouse keeper, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is great. They're right up my alley.
Made for me.
Exactly. I came out, I met the chairs at the time, and they were like, sure, this is what you have to do. I was like, okay, I can do that. And they encourage us volunteers to learn something that we're drawn to, something of interest to us. And so I started reading all the information about Horton Point Lighthouse. And through that, I discovered there was one woman lighthouse keeper, Stella Prince. Unfortunately, we didn't know anything about her other than one paragraph. And very nothing had been published about her. Nothing had been, she was not recognized in any way by the world. And it just didn't seem right to me. I mean, I did read lots of books about lighthouse keepers. I read everything about women lighthouse keepers, particularly women who keep the light on Katie, the lighthouse keeper's daughter, the lighthouse keeper's wife. I have a whole shelf of them. And Stella is never mentioned in anything. But I learned a lot about women lighthouse keepers in that process. So then I went to our original research. I had to go through the archives at Southold Historical Museum. Suffolk County Museum, as it turned out, had a collection of the Prince family records. Helen Prince, who was a descendant of Stella's, became the family historian. She was a school teacher in Greenport. She did amazing work. She would be a good person for your podcast, where she's still alive. She died at 103, I think, many years ago. But she did gather all the family information, and she wrote a genealogy book. So through that book, I was able to learn that Stella was in fact a seventh generation descendant of Captain John Prince, who was a whaling captain from New Bedford, Massachusetts, settled here in the 1700s, and that began the Prince family legacy throughout Southold. So there are many Prince family descendants here in Southold still. But Stella was kind of not the wealthy side of the family. You know, families have different. Her father was kind of a bit of a black sheep.
Yes.
So she didn't have a lot of the benefits that some of the other family members had. And that helped with the writing of the book, to have that comparison between her life. And I focused on one of her cousins who had a very enriched life comparatively.
Yes, yes.
So that's kind of where it all began, I
And
guess.
you really see how that the contrast in families really made her so outstanding, because she became so dedicated
That's right.
to this you mentioned when her dad became the lighthouse keeper, it really becomes a family business.
Absolutely. And
Uh-huh.
that's true of all lighthouse keeping. If the family is, if it's a lighthouse, a landlocked lighthouse where the family lives on site, as they did, they lived right in this room that we're in. This was their parlor. This was their whole house. There's a stairway in the back that they would go up to 2 bedrooms upstairs. This was it. And the head keeper lived on the other side. This was divided in half back in that time. This
Right.
was it. This was
You
their
can't
whole
change
house.
your mind. It's so tiny. I mean, it seems
Exactly.
very
You're here.
tiny to us.
And back in that time, there was no road that even came here. So although they're only 2 miles outside of Southold, when she came here as 3 years old with her mom, her dad, and her baby sister, this was their whole world. This
Yeah.
and the Goldsmiths, who were the head keeper, Goldsmith, Captain Goldsmith, and his wife.
So even in your book, it was a trip to go into town,
Absolutely.
to take the horses and hitch them up to a wagon and go in to get provisions.
Yes, absolutely. So
Yeah.
compared to lighthouse keepers who were on a rock in the middle of, in the middle of a harbor, they were actually very fortunate here. They had fertile land, they could grow, they always had a big kitchen garden in the back, they grew their own crops.
Yeah.
But the Lighthouse Society at the time, who ran all, Lighthouse Service ran all U.S. lighthouses before the Coast Guard. So when Stella was doing this, it would be the Lighthouse Service. They did come twice a year. They provided basic provisions. They brought anything that the family might need in terms of uh, rice and basic things,
Sugar,
beans.
coffee,
Exactly,
things like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but other than that, you're kind of on your own.
No DoorDash. Yeah.
Yeah, no DoorDash. Yeah,
Nothing like that.
nothing like that.
Yeah.
So they really had to make do with what they had. And part of the intrigue of that for me is that when there is a shipwreck, and there were at about 13 shipwrecks off directly in this little cove. This cove was known as Dead Man's Cove back in the day. And so there were known 13 shipwrecks. And so you as a lighthouse keeper would help in the save potentially. It was part of the job, although not the main part. It was certainly part of it. But then you had to house those people until someone came to get them. You had to tend to their wounds. You had to feed them and clothe them, and you didn't get anything extra for that. That came out of your supplies.
Right.
So you just took care of people that needed to be taken care of. That was the lighthouse keeper's job.
If anybody's not listening, there are so many metaphors, and the reason why I chose, the name for the podcast, because the people that we speak to do exactly that. They're incredibly selfless and very dedicated.
Yes.
And like you said, they sometimes, I want to say, overlooked in some, maybe they were not high paying, if I
No,
remember.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
No, it's not a high paying job. It is a federal job. It is a federal job, and eventually Coast Guard took it over. But they would make $400 to $500 a year,
Right.
an annual salary of $400 to $500. But at least that was a steady income for someone like Stella's father, who had been a carpenter and wasn't necessarily a hard worker. This provided his family with a good base of income.
Yes.
So that
They
was
had a roof
something.
over their head, about a
Exactly,
very
exactly.
lamp that spun around in the middle of the night,
Exactly. And that had to be tended to
Yeah.
throughout the night and had to be kept lit.
which I believe that was part of the story. The family had to be quiet during the day because that's the only time the dad would sleep.
That's right.
And then
That's right.
he would wake up, and they would, if it was a particularly horrific storm, it was all hands on deck. Maybe that's
Absolutely.
exactly where that.
And everybody in a lighthouse family has to contribute. Everybody has jobs to do, so that all the brass has to be polished. Everything has to be kept military clean, because at any time, twice a year, a lighthouse inspector shows up before Coast Guard even. It was still a military operation. And so there was a white glove inspection. So there was no not making your bed in the morning or leaving toys around on the floor or dishes
in the sink.
in the sink, although there's no sink here. But if they had a sink, you couldn't leave the dishes in there.
Yeah.
They had to go outside to do
Yeah.
to do dishes. But yeah. So
Why do you think people are drawn to lighthouses in general?
well, you
'Cause
know
you
what?
have a number of visitors.
Yes, we have many visitors here. We had 86 on Sunday. It was a
No
very
kidding.
big day. Yeah, so that's a lot of people come through here. And I think people are very attracted to the romantic idea. I mean, the view here is magnificent.
Yes.
You can't beat it. It really is a hidden gem
Yes.
for Southold. And yet, people are drawn by that, but they're also the fact that this lighthouse is accessible, that you can climb it. We have a volunteer up top.
Yes.
We stay up there. in the summer we have to close when it hits 100 degrees up there because
Yeah.
it does get hot in that room, as you guys just experienced. But,
A little,
but
yeah,
yes,
used a good breeze, but yeah, it's
yes,
still, you have such an appreciation for the people who do this job
yes,
because we're
yes.
living in the exact conditions that they lived in.
Exactly, exactly. So you're able to really see what
Deep
this was like.
appreciation, yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And these were people who were very selfless in their work, and I think that's particularly true of Stella. The way I draw her in the book is that she was drawn to this place from the first time she arrived at 3 years old. She just loved it, and then she became, and it's referred to many, many times throughout the research I did. She took on a yeoman's job. Her
Mhm.
father was not reliable. He probably suffered from what we would now refer to as PTSD. He had been twice wounded Civil War veteran. And she stepped up even as a young child. And when she left school at the age of 12, he let go of the assistant keeper and relied on Stella and her sister to do the job of the assistant keeper. So she was then covering every other night
Right,
for him, essentially. They did a night on, night off kind of thing.
right.
So yeah.
It just goes to show you that you mentioned she was drawn to it, which I know you and I could probably say the same exact thing.
Yes, yes.
Um, and it fortified her. It becomes a part of doing a difficult task. And a lot of the people that we talk to on the podcast, it's a calling,
Yes.
it's your purpose.
Yes.
And you can find from this young lady, from the arduous task that she had to do,
Right.
she never felt, she got some level of joy, satisfaction out of it.
Right. I think she just saw it as this work has to be done, and she was the one who had to do it most of the time. I didn't get the sense that her mother did much of the work. And her sister was younger than her and much smaller built. When you see a picture of the two of them as adults, you see that her sister's much slighter. Stella's pretty hefty, especially later in life
Right.
when she's no longer
You
here.
go up. We encourage you strongly to come and see this lighthouse because it's kept its original. You have to go up this winding staircase, and you're
Yes.
thinking, how did this young lady
Yes.
carry it was whale oil, right? Up the.
Well, actually, it was kerosene when Stella was here. Whale oil was already done.
Okay.
Yes, but that can that they carried is 40 pounds when it's full of oil. So when they were very young, her sister and her would fill it a little bit and carry it up, and then come back down and get it and do it again and again until they had enough oil. You always, at the end of the night, you always had to keep a full can of oil there because you never knew if there was going to be a storm blow in and you had to suddenly light those wicks. You had to make sure the oil was there. You couldn't then start filling it, so carrying it up. So that was part of closing it up for the day, is making sure you were prepared for an emergency.
Did you ever find in some of your research that Stella put her own little touches on the process, her own way of doing things, in the way that it wasn't necessarily a woman's touch, but you could tell that some people knew she had a way of doing it her way.
Well,
Yeah, her little, special to make it her own.
Well, she was very meticulous about the work, and it is the sort of work that requires that. And I see that proved out by the fact that when she left in 1904 to marry. The gentleman who she had been working with, Captain Ebbets, had always had glowing reviews while she was here. And when she left, he was cited for things like leaving oil rags in the tower. So when the inspector would come in, he was getting, they were called demerits. He was getting demerits. Now, he was a much older man by then, and he wanted to retire, and they couldn't find someone to take his place. Nevertheless, the place fell apart when she wasn't around.
She had a level of vigilance.
Yes, yes. But she did recognize, as a woman, there were things that she couldn't do. And that was part of, I felt, part of why she did ultimately agree to marry. She, the lighthouse keepers are responsible to whitewash the outside of the tower. So they're basically rigging, that's their job. Now they would bring in the government would bring in masons and specialty men, specialty workers. And I say men because they were all men then. But there were major maintenance jobs that had to be done on this building. And that became, every year they had to empty the cistern that was in the basement, paint it with lead-based paint, and then refill it, let it refill.
Yes.
So yeah, lighthouse keepers didn't live long usually.
Yes. Oh, goodness gracious.
Right.
So one of the most interesting things we talk about the lighthouse is, you put yourself in the position of a person who's actually in the water in a storm. and you think to yourself, absolutely terrified, but the light is there to help. You made an interesting point, or the light is there to send you away.
Yeah, actually, lighthouses are put in navigational areas that are dangerous to warn ships to stay away from that area. They're not supposed to draw you in, they're supposed to keep you away.
Okay.
So, for example, here, this was known, as I said earlier, I think, as Dead Man's Cove, which was actually a misnomer because no one died here of a shipwreck. They, your boat could hit a rock and you'd get a hole in the boat, but there's a sandbar that juts across. So at low tide, you'd land on the sandbar and then you were able to unload passengers and goods. So no one did die. It became that, I think they used that term because there were 13 shipwrecks and they were making the case to the federal government that we needed a lighthouse built here.
Right.
George Washington came through here as a young soldier and on his way to Connecticut, and he was told by a local representative that we needed a lighthouse here and we needed a lighthouse at Montauk Point. Montauk Point was then built 1790 when he became president. Montauk Lighthouse was up and running by 1797. Horton Point wasn't built until 1857, more than 60 years later. We think there was some issues with land ownership at the time. I didn't mention this was named Horton after Barnabas Horton, who was one of the original settlers to Southold. He came here in 1640 from Connecticut with Reverend Young, and his family then inherited this. He was granted this, what was called a cliff lot, so he owned the land from the Sound to the bay.
Wow.
I believe 40 yards wide, but long, right through what is now the center of Southold town. So this land was used for grazing his sheep, and then it passed down through his family. In 1820, his last descendant lost it in a gambling debt.
No kidding.
And so then it went into government hands, and it went on from there with multiple owners. The last owner actually bought it from somebody for $50 and sold it to the federal government a few months later for $500.
Oh my
His family is still here. He made his family by that sale. So yeah, it's really interesting though. These things happen even back then, you know.
And it's funny, I'll share with the viewers and listeners, you know, this is a symbolic of my grandparents used to live on Horton Lane, and they came out here in the early 60s and built a house here. And so coming here with my grandfather and making up these romantic stories, and I used to catch fireflies and lightning bugs out on that lawn in the middle of the night. There was such a pervasive, profound talk about the light, and things that, especially when you're a kid and it's dark out, you know, the fact that there's always light and somebody's there to keep you safe, might be a little bit why I was so drawn to lighthouses. But it means so much to me to have you, Mary, be part of this podcast to kind of bring me home and fortify exactly the reason why we called the podcast the Lighthouse Keepers Podcast. There's no mistake in that. It's exactly why you know, you never know all the light that people give, and you are such a treasure, not only to this town but to Stella and the Prince's family. So if people wanted to come to the lighthouse, what's the best way that they can get here?
So the lighthouse is open from Memorial Day through the middle of September on Saturdays and Sundays from 11:30 to 4. We have volunteers who man the museum here and are in the tower. So you usually can climb up into the tower, which is the big draw, of course.
Highly recommended.
Yeah, the view is magnificent and it really gives you a nice perspective. But we have a nice nautical museum here people do enjoy, and we can share with you much of the history of the artifacts that you see around you. There's many, many stories that we share with people as they come through. So it's really a pleasure. We all enjoy talking to people and sharing, you know, what we've learned. So yeah.
Mary, again, thank you so much, Mary Korpi, to everyone here at the Horton Point Historical Society, Southold Historical Society. Thank you so much for having us here today. This has been truly, truly a gem and a blessing. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you very much.